Tuesday, July 20th, 2021. This is the Arlington County, Virginia Board of Equalization hearing. There are 5 cases on the agenda. The first case is RPC Economic Unit 3501102H, property located at 1700 Richmond Highway. We have Mr. Blake Warren and Mr. Jeremy Chitlick representing the owners. Mr. Warren, I believe you can go ahead and start with your 8 minutes and tell us about the property.
Okay, thank you. If the board would please turn to page, I believe it is 53 of 110 of the board's or the memo response package from the county. You'll find our summary of facts. This is the Marriott Crystal Gateway. It's located at 1700 Richmond Highway. It was originally assessed at $101,077,800, which is $144,000 a room for 2021. The county is recommending a revised value to the board of $97,685,700, and our requested value is $68,732,000, or $98,000 a room. This is a property that was originally built in 1982. It's a full-service hotel with 697 total rooms and located in the Crystal City submarket right off Richmond Highway. The property is in close proximity to the Crystal City Metro station. As I'm sure all of you realize, and if you've heard any cases regarding hotels this year for the 2021 assessments, hotels were just absolutely crushed last year due to COVID. Total revenue at this subject property for 2020 decreased a total of 79% year over year from 2019. A total of $45,139,128 drop from in the county's current 2021 assessment model for the subject. They are estimating a stabilized total revenue of $57,095,588, which is just $170,000 below what was actually reported in 2019. You'll see that this property was fairly stabilized. Looking at page 4, the INE summary sheet from 2017 to the most recent reporting year in 2020, $58,400,000 in 2017, $56 million in 2018, $57 million in 2019, and then you see the big drop due to COVID and the lockdown of $12 million in 2020. It is also important to note that the county is estimating a higher total miscellaneous income of $2,854,779, which is approximately $141,466 above what was reported in the most stabilized reporting year of 2019 before the pandemic. There's really, in these cases, except for one of them, we have 5 hotel cases to present to you today. These are going to be basically come down to one thing, one main issue across all of them, and it's with regard to the county's adjustment below the line for COVID. Their adjustment currently for 2021 that they're recommending, it's with regard to the reserves. So the actual reserves that have historically been reported at the subject property over the last several years is 5% of gross revenue. The county was initially using, if you see in column D, a reserve rate of 4.5%. That's been revised to 5% in column F, their revision column, and that's the change that you're seeing. Now, the county's below the line adjustment for COVID of $37,112,132. That is calculated based on their guidelines, and you can find that in their guidelines, and you can find it in our page, please, page 57 of 110. You'll see a clipping of the guidelines for the COVID-19 adjustments, and for full service hotel, which this property is. They're taking a below the line deduction of 65% of the total revenue estimated. And that's how they're calculating that $37 million. As we previously stated, the actual lost revenue was closer to 78%, 79% of $45 million. And that's the big difference. We're taking the actual lost rent. So while we feel the county overall methodology of consideration for COVID and the impact it had on 2020 is correct in stabilizing an income approach and then taking an adjustment below the line. Similar to what we see with other properties is when we appeal for a current year assessment, we provide the most recent information, and their estimation of 65% is just below what the actual lost revenue was for this property. We've shown evidence in the 2020 profit and loss statement survey that was submitted and certified by the owner, that the actual lost revenue from 19 to 20 was in fact 45 million. So we're asking that the board take consideration to that fact. The other main difference is with regard to the cap rate. The county did increase their cap rate from 2020 to 2021. In 2020, they were using an 8.04%. The 2021 assessment is being calculated using a cap rate that's 50 basis points higher, 8.54%. We did not feel that was reflective of the risk that this property is experiencing and will continue to experience as it comes out of COVID and the pandemic. Our cap rate that we're using right now is actually 200 basis points above what was used in the 2020 assessment. And that is supported by RERC reports that we've supplied from the change in 19 to 20, where we're seeing anywhere from 80 to 100 basis points increase. But again, I don't think much of that can be quantified at this point because we're still going through it. This is not a one-year blip where these properties are going to be back up and running and fully stabilized. As you'll see next year when we supply the 2021 profit and loss statement. I know traveling has opened back up and personal vacations have really picked up, but I think what you're seeing is business travel has changed, and it's going to be a change that you're going to see impacted in the future with these kind of hybrid models of a lot of employers employing a work from home strategy, and we're not seeing as much business travel, and I don't think that's going to pick back up at any point soon. So again, the main consideration here that we're hoping the board considers is the actual lost revenue that we've supplied in the 2020 profit and loss in comparison to the 2019. The county has made an adjustment for 65% of lost revenue. But again, what we're actually here and able to show you when we go through the appeals process is what was the actual lost revenue. So we're hoping the board gives consideration to that fact. Jeremy, I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
The only reason the hotel did 12 million in revenue is because it was open for 2.5 months before the real COVID impact was felt. So if you calculate that, you'll see that's essentially 2.5 months worth of normal operations, and then they were just decimated for the rest of the year. And that's where it was as of January 1st. So we're valuing this as of January 1st. And what the county basically said is, we'll give you a portion of what you lost last year, and then everything else is essentially the same as if it was normal and operating. If we were out of COVID and things were back to normal, I think that would make some sense. But we were very aggressive, or not aggressive at all, with our income. And the reason we were is because we figured the higher income would, if you're going to use that higher income, you're going to have to use much higher risk, which is why our cap rate's higher. And the county essentially accepted our higher income, but said, but we're still going to use the lower risk of the lower cap rate. So it's kind of, they took one, but not the whole part of the argument. So if you are going to use that lower cap rate, you would need to use much lower income.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chikas for the county, please.
Good morning, board members. Good morning, Mr. Bourne. Good morning, Mr. Chitlick. We are talking about Crystal Gateway Marriott. Essentially surmised nicely by Mr. Warren. We do believe this was a property that was fairly stabilized. As you can see in the comment section of our summary sheet, the owner spent over $32 million on renovations, guest rooms, bathrooms, conference rooms, obviously expecting a healthy return on investment, given its placement across the street from the metro and approximately 1 block away from Amazon HQ2. It is placed well regardless of what happened last year, but given what happened last year, we did make heavy revisions. As we talked about with the board at the beginning of the year, we looked at making across the board adjustments as would make sense with mass appraisal. Looking at all of the full service as this property is, we made adjustments to all full service and all select service hotels at negative 65% of total revenue. As Mr. Warren and Mr. Chitlick pointed out, they were in agreement with our stabilized numbers seen in columns D, F, and G. The only real difference we made from columns D to F was matching the historical reserves for furniture, fixture, and equipment. That's something we've done historically. If we use guideline FF&E and then we see that historically they've operated under a different number, we'll generally switch to that different number if it's in their favor. So again, we're the same NOI in our revision as is the appellant. Again, as Mr. Warren noted, it's really a difference of some 150 basis points for the cap rate and then a larger COVID adjustment below the line. We want to highlight the fact that obviously making a 150 basis point adjustment to COVID to account for COVID, but then also adding almost $8 million of below the line adjustment caused the year-over-year assessment to drop by over 50%, which we just believe is a bit drastic, 2020 notwithstanding. Ours, we believe, was a more reasonable 35% drop year over year. Again, representative of what happened in a one-time, one-year deal. As Mr. Chitlick pointed out, in the first 3 months of the year, they were actually doing quite well. We've talked about this before. Arlington is a well-traveled place. It set tourism records in 2018. It broke them in 2019. We do believe that they were on their way to them again in 2020. Given that what we saw in 2020 was a devastation to the hotel economy, not just this particular property, we do believe that using the broad swath metrics that we use, in this case, again, negative 65% for all full service, all select service makes more sense in a mass appraisal standpoint. If you were to look at this as a fee appraiser, it might make more sense to isolate one component and 1 year's drop in revenue as the appellants did. But again, we do believe that making that adjustment as well as 150 basis points to the cap rate without support, I know they mentioned RERC, but I don't believe RERC mentioned 150 basis point addition. As Mr. Warren did note, we already had accounted for that somewhat in a 50 basis points addition from 2020 to 2021. We did account for the bid, hence the 0.043 cap rate on the revision. Again, we did below the line adjustment of a negative 65% of the stabilized revenue, and we believe that the revision of $97,685,700 is prudent, it's fair, and most important, it's equitable with other full service properties that face the same dire circumstances that the appellants did. Again, this is a 35% drop year over year. We do believe this is fair, it's prudent, and warranted. Irving, do you have anything to add?
No, I don't.
So we do believe the revision should be confirmed at $97,685,700. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions from board members? Mr. Lawson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This is for Mr. Warren. In your column G, you've done two things. You've upped the cap rate and upped the COVID adjustment. Isn't that double dipping?
I mean, I don't think so. The county's done the same in their column as well. They've increased the cap rate for the risk, but then they've also taken a below the line deduction for the lost revenue as well. I realize our cap rate probably looks aggressive, especially based off of the support that we've acknowledged. And I know it's difficult to get cap rate movement at the board when it's the Board of Equalization and a cap rate that's equalized across all property types. I think what's really important about our column G is that COVID adjustment below the line. Again, the county, when they're doing mass appraisal, they before they had any of the final full year 2020 calendar year P&L statements, said, okay, for all full service hotels, we're going to take a below the line adjustment of 65% of the revenue. But again, as we come in here with apartments and other things, as we go through the appeals process, we're able to provide the most updated information. And what we've been able to show them is that the actual lost revenue year over year from 19 to 20 is not 37 million, it was 45 million. So we're really hoping that the board takes into consideration that lost rent.
But let me expand upon this. The cap rate the cap rate exists to reflect risk, but the risk is, it seems to me, is addressed by the COVID reduction, and so it seems to me it's one or the other, not both.
The cap rate is a product of the risk going forward based off the income that we're using. The COVID deduction that we've taken is really just the factual loss from column E. That is the absolute number of what is lost from column E to get us to the difference between essentially column E and column F. So one is the factual loss from the past that we're using looking forward. The other is the risk associated with using essentially a $12 million NOI on a property that just lost $2 million as a go-forward value.
Right. Madam Chairman, I'm probably focusing in too much detail, but we got 4 cases that are, it seems to me, almost precisely the same. And I think that what we do on this will direct what we do on the others. But again, I contend that the cap rate, we're taking into account COVID was a really bad year. Okay, we got all that, revenue went down, we've addressed the loss of revenue, but the risk going forward isn't necessarily based upon that 1 year drop in revenue. So what I'm struggling with is, why do both? And I maybe it's been answered, and so anyhow, I'll go ahead and stop there.
Okay. Other questions? Mr. Metzger.
I wanted to address the point that the appellant made twice on the guideline this year of a 65% decrease in revenue below the line is based on not the most current data, because it's mass appraisal and you can't wait till January 2021 to make these decisions. So I guess I'm asking the department to confirm that the 65% for full and select service hotels that you're using as a deduction below the line is based on information that you got before you got the whole massive input from those affected hotels, or not?
That is correct, Mr. Metzger. Yeah, as we've said before, the guidelines obviously have to be printed and compiled sometime in November, December. So any information we get in April, March or April of 2021 is 4 or 5 months removed from the guidelines. So
just to expand almost to nauseum, it's just not possible to get the best data based on the inputs from the various target hotels. You just got to do what you got to do, like usual.
That's right? Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Okay, Mr. Panoranda, did you have your hand up?
I'm sorry, I did, but it was pretty much sort of the same line of questioning that Mr. Matzkin just asked in reference to the percentages. So I'm okay with it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Hoffman, I can't let you ask a question because you came in a couple minutes late and didn't hear the whole thing. So unfortunately, you'll join us on the next case. Pardon me?
I mean, I can sit out this one if you want, but I logged on literally as the appellant was introducing the name of the property. So, I mean, if you want me to sit out, I can.
Okay, any objection from either side? No? Mr. Chikas? No? All right, go ahead, Mr. Hoffman.
All right, yeah, I'm just curious because this is kind of a strange layout of this building. The square footage I've got on one of the county's sheets is 500,000, more or less, but I'm not sure if that included garage square footage or if that was just all hotel square footage.
Yeah, to be honest, I do not know. If you're talking about, you're referencing the worksheet itself, the 2021 commercial property worksheet.
Yeah, on page 6, it says 500,175 square feet total area, but I think that might include the garage.
It's very possible, without trying to sort of pass it on to others. It's just that it depends on how old this information is when those remarks were put in. It makes reference to total area phase 1, so I'm just not sure. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
Well, it does include in that same box the actual square footage for the garage.
Yeah.
73,148 square feet.
Right.
All right, so it might be 500 minus the 73 for actual hotel area. I see
Could be.
nodding. Okay. Which is probably about 600 square feet per room. That sounds about right. If you include all the common areas and the event space and everything. Okay.
All right, any other questions? No? All right, Mr. Chikas, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Yes, ma'am. Just kind of hopping on what Mr. Lawson had spoken about. We do believe in a sense that adding 150 basis points as well as a full accounting of the difference between 2019 and 2020's numbers do quote unquote account for a double dipping. If you were to just take the below the line adjustment from the appellant but use the county's cap rate, which again is applied equitably to all full service hotels, you would end up with a number $21 million higher than what the appellant suggests. And I think that's, again, not prudent. That's how you get an over 50% year over year adjustment. We do believe that the negative 65% total revenue adjustment, which equated to a 35% drop year over year, again, is more prudent, equitable with other full service hotels, and fair for the 1 year adjustment that COVID was. That being said, we do believe the county should be confirmed at the revised value of $97,685,700. Thank you.
One of the things also to add, since cap rate has been a subject of discussion during this case, the appellant continuously points out the RARC document, which we also looked at. RARC is a national publication and they segmented by hotels only. We also looked at PwC publication, which has the hotel market broken out by hotel type, similar to how we value hotels. If you look at what we looked at in PwC, they have an actual section about full service lodging, a section about luxury upper scale lodging, and a section about selective service lodging. These are some of the pages in which we discussed, or we reviewed rather, when we determined to increase our cap rate. We looked at RARC, but we also looked at PwC, which again has a section dedicated to each hotel type and not just lump all hotels into one category. And we definitely disagree with the 200 basis point increase, since RARC's highest change was 100 basis points. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Mr. Warren, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Yes, as we previously stated, or as the county's previously just stated, we did use a higher cap rate. However, the county has increased their cap rate by 50 basis points for the risk profile of the property moving forward, and then added a deduction below the line for their estimate of lost rent during COVID. And again, what we would direct the board to is the actual lost rent that we've provided in the most recent 2020 P&L, which is approximately $8 million more at $45,139,128. So asking that the board consider the most up-to-date information in consideration of the lost revenue for 2020.
Yeah, to Mr. Maskin's question earlier, they assumed what the lost rent would be and used that. They now have more information to see that they were low on that number and should have used a higher figure, and that higher figure is 45 million. What Mr. Lawson mentioned was, is it a double dip to either take the deduct and the cap rate? We don't feel it is, but we also don't feel that the county did either of those things because they didn't take the true deduct. Now that they've learned at the first level that the deduction should have been 45.1 million. They still only used the 37.1 million they originally used.
Okay, thank you. All right, it's just among the board members. What's everybody think? Mr. Metzger.
I read the other day from a county, a rural county in Michigan, health administrator, where he's very frustrated about concerning the very low vaccination rates for the people that he worries about professionally. And he called COVID a natural disaster happening in slow motion. And that stuck with me for that case, for that instance, but also for this case and the subsequent cases. That turning on a dime in mass appraisal in an urban area like this with lots of density is just not possible. I'm as sympathetic as I am to this and other appellants, especially hotel appellants, because they were so much more devastated than pretty much anybody else. I got to go with the elements of mass appraisal that, based on the information, as an example, that the assessor had in December and not in January and February, we've got to go with the best guess. Being sensitive to dramatically, but maybe not necessarily as dramatic as it turned out, loss of revenue and the opposite, increasing the cap rate. We just can't do all this. I'm thinking in this slow motion vein, I'm thinking for next year when we're sitting here, there's still going to be a deduction below the line. 2021 is not a polar opposite of 2020 by any means. Still very, very slow first third of the year, and probably 2/3 are going to be slower. And we're going to have to do this exercise again. And the various hotel owners and other commercial properties are going to have to just bear with the process, that it can't be tailor-made for their individual legitimate uses. As a commercial, one related point, as a commercial realtor, I pay a lot of attention to office use and users and their behaviors. And I thought the appellant's point that good chance that business travel, hotel stays, is not going to come back anytime, maybe ever, to the level that it was in 2018 or 19. The jury's still out on that, but poll after poll after poll says certainly there's going to be a lot less office leased for people, a lot more sharing, a lot more virtual. And that's going to bleed over to visiting customers and members of Congress and so forth. And so this is going to play out for a while. And I don't think we can fix this year all at once with perfect information. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other comments? Mr. Lawson.
I'm going to disagree with my distinguished colleague. Here's my thinking, and I want to thank, both the applicant and the county for presenting this so clearly. I mean, it seems to me our sole decision is the bottom line, is a below the line deduction adequate, period. I mean, I think that's the only thing we decide here today. And what we decide on this will carry forward to the next at least 3 cases. The way I look at it, and Chris was mentioning, a 50%. And if you're ever going to have a situation where 50% is not appropriate, it's this year, it's last year, it's the COVID. And the hotel industry was whacked so harshly, and the county made a prediction, and it turned out to be not large enough. And so I understand the mass appraisal and so forth. And yet, if one of the presumptions of the mass appraisal turns out, when we get more accurate information, to not have been correct, I think you can't just say, well, it's a mass appraisal and therefore we're going to ignore it. Where I am, and I may or may not be in the majority, where I am is I would go with the county's cap rate and the applicant's below the line deduction.
Okay. Other comments?
May I? Mark,
Mr. Yates, yes, go ahead.
Barnes, I understand the appellant's position concerning the $8 million, but are we prepared to now go through and adjust the county on every hotel or all these? Because they picked a date, they picked a number, and that they thought was accurate, and would have to look at every one of these projects or properties and make that same kind of adjustment. At this point, there's an equalization that's in existence, and it will reflect next year again when we look at it based on this year's. I do understand the appellant's position with that, that additional 8 million, but I think, and this is, from an equalization standpoint, I don't think we can address it on this specific case only. We'd have to address it across the board.
But Mark, it isn't, I think it's somewhat incumbent upon the ownership to decide, this is just not right what the county's done. And so I don't think it's necessarily up to us to go and fix every hotel that's in this situation. I think it's up to the owners to bring it forward and say, whoa, time out. The county estimated 65, we're actually at 80. And therefore an adjustment should be made here. And I live at a hotel. It's a shared building, hotels below us. And for, 10 months last year, 9 months last year, that parking lot was empty. And I can't imagine any investor buying any hotel for anything, to be honest. And yet we can't do that. You look at the negative NOI, and we're not going to say, well, it's valueless. And I don't think it's going to be that much of a challenge to go back and look at the actual figures and have them play a role in what the value is.
Mr. Matzkin.
I'd like to expand on Mark's point just a bit about equalization. That's what was in the back of my mind. I didn't voice it, he did. But it wouldn't, for today, if we reduce this one to apparently what the income loss was, we could certainly finish that today with the other related cases because they're so very, very much the same. What I'm concerned about is, I'm making this up, but just to make my point, last week's hotels, next week's hotels, and more importantly, the hotels that did not appeal. Now all of a sudden we have different, if you appeal, if you squeak, you get, in this case, a legitimate relief. And if you don't, you don't. I don't know that that's the way we ought to do it. We need to treat everyone the same. If the assessor makes a real mistake on an appellant, clearly we should remediate it, but not for a whole class of facilities. As sympathetic as I am, I think it's just going to, once again, going to take place over a couple of years. Lastly, of course, the assessment has gone down by more than a third. It's not that they're getting no relief. Maybe it should be 40%, but we'd have to do everybody all the time, everywhere, including people who haven't asked and we don't have their information at the ready. So
I think, Ken, and then I'm going to drop it, Madam Chairman. I'll just make one more comment. I think that maybe it's because I'm a lawyer, I don't know, but it seems to me that if you have an assumption in the mass appraisal and that assumption is not right, then we can't say, well, we got to equalize, and even though there's a mistake, we're going to honor that mistake, and that's going to be where we end up. I think that if there's an assumption in the mass appraisal that is off by this magnitude, it's got to be looked at. It's got to be addressed. It's got to be fixed. That's where I am, and I'm probably going to get outvoted.
Okay. All right. Other folks? Mr. Penaranda.
Yeah, well, the first thing that came to me when I read the package on this one and all the other cases is, the below the line deductions. Why couldn't it be 70%, 75%? But I think, that was the question that Mr. Matskin asked, and yeah. And like all the other guidelines, they come from numbers that are reported and what's available at the time to produce the guidelines. I don't think that we can, and I don't think the assumption that the county is making, like Mr. Lawson says, that, they're incorrect. It's just, I don't think the appellant is saying that they're incorrect. They're just saying, for this year, we would like to use the actual below the line deduction number. But, we're using stabilized numbers, and to just pick and choose what numbers we're going to use for a particular case, I don't think that's the right way to do it. I don't think we've done it before, and I don't think we should start. I think I'm convinced that the guidelines that the county is using are based on numbers that they obtain, and they came up with a percentage that it should be appropriate for each category. So, I'm okay with the revised assessment the way it is. I think the cap rate is proper for all the full service hotels, and the percentage of deduction is, what they came up with this year. And to make a deduction based on each appeal just for this year based on actual numbers, I don't think it'd be equalizing to the rest of the hotels. So I'm okay with it.
Okay. Any other? Mr. Hoffman?
I would support a reduction the way Barnes has come up with. I think that's fair. On this particular property, I think for hotels, you probably, I could get behind the county's cap rate. I think others that are not in Amazon right at their back door are probably not going to get the type of investment treatment that that this one would. So if this was outside of that neighborhood, I would probably support the appellant's cap rate, but I know that there's some embedded value in Crystal City that the investment community sees as well, which is supported by, the one or two sales that we have. Americana Hotel. I wish the county would go outside and look at more sales, but there really weren't a lot. So there's not much you can do there. So I'd support a reduction. That's all I have to say.
Mary?
Yes, I'm sorry, Mr. Yates. I was doing some math.
I'm sorry. Greg, would you, I totally understand where the appellant's coming from on that, and the difference in the below the line, but are we prepared to do this on every one of the appeals for a hotel? I mean, they're all going to come in with the same issue, that the 65% is not enough. And I was impressed at 65% when the county announced that a couple months ago. But I understand that it was a photograph in time.
Yeah, I mean, Mark, I'm probably more aggressive. I would actually support the full appellant's proposal with the cap rate increase and everything. The only issue I have with that is then you start falling significantly below replacement cost. So I think there's a backstop on the value, that you're not going to get all the way down to 68 in any kind of orderly sale. Somebody's going to pick that up for a lot higher if this was actually a marketed property.
But are you ready to do this on all the hotels coming forward?
Yeah, I mean, we have to this year. I mean, it's going to be a tricky one just because there's not a lot of sales. The market's locked up.
Right.
I mean,
there's not going to be sales, right?
And if you want to look at this property, is actually a really good example because I believe it sold in 2006 for $100 million, right? And at that time, I'm going off memory here, so don't quote me entirely, but hotel cap rates were probably around 7 or 8, and between that time and 2009, they jumped up to 12.5. And it took 4 or 5 years to get back down below that. And as the government kind of supported lending and borrowing and all that for the next decade, hotel cap rates ended up going down into the 6s and some of them even into the 5s on some transactions. So, but it took a while. So there was a 4 or 5 year period where, if you looked at it on paper, the owner of this property was underwater. Now the taxes didn't go down. I don't know what the board was composed of back then, or I have no idea what the appeal history was. But if I look at the tax history, the rate was 86 cents. And
Right, but the tax rate is set differently than the cap
but
rate.
the assessments never went down. So I don't really know why that didn't track. But that's over a decade ago, so not really up for discussion.
Right. Yeah, my only concern with taking the appellant's number below the line, now you've got an adjusted NOI and you're taking it from a lower number. I mean, just doing quick math, if you took the original assessment and took that same number, I mean, you're off by like $4 million, which I don't mean to sound like, oh, that's not a lot of money, because that is a lot of money, but I don't feel comfortable doing it. I think the revised assessment that the county's done, it seems more fair and more equalized. And, the 65%, that is substantial.
It is.
Well, but we do know that it is not quite accurate. That it does miss projecting forward with the impact of those first 2 months.
Right. Right, but I guess looking at, where it's been, I think Mr. Matzkin made the point. I can't get back to it, but I mean, the original assessment is dropping from nearly 150 million to 97 million. I mean, that's a substantial drop for a 1 year. And I realize we're going to go back and look at this. I mean, the appellant's number of 68 million, like Mr. Huffman said, I think that's far too low. I mean, even if there was a buyer out there, they would not, they would pay more than 68 million. So, at this point, when I listen to the two sides, I would think that the 97 million is more reasonable.
But Mary, what do you think about using the county's cap rate, but with the adjusted NOI, or with the adjusted number, excuse me, not the NOI, with that other 8 million in there, the 45?
Off of the original or off of the revised?
The revised.
You're bringing it down to like 89 million. I think that seems low to me. I don't know. What's everybody else think?
I could do that. And I would say the county's cap rate only because of the location of that property. That's probably justified.
Mr. Matzkin?
In other classes of real property that we look at, and I'm thinking particularly apartment buildings and vacancy and collection, which had some dramatic twists and turns this year, not like hotels income, but still dramatic. We have guidelines based on the best information that the county could gather late last year. And some of them did pretty well. I'm thinking one last week and actually came in under the guideline for vacancy and collection, but nonetheless, they got that benefit. And others come, percentage points as a percentage of the whole thing, double digit, additional vacancy and collection above the county guideline, but we don't tailor it for them. And in part because COVID hurt them, but because people went home and lived in parents' basements and whatnot during the year. It just scares me to take individual dramatic one-off changes as, I don't know, it's really repeat what I said before. What about those affected properties that didn't complain? They all of a sudden get, complain's the wrong word, I apologize, appeal. I didn't mean complain. That they don't get the benefit of this one-off. That throws things way out of whack. We might as well just do everyone individually and have a team of 4,000 assessors doing all this stuff on, New Year's Eve every year or whenever the the INEs come in. I'm very, as sympathetic as I am, I'm very uncomfortable with picking and choosing.
Let me ask Chris, how many full-service hotels are in the county? 10, 12?
It's more than that.
It's not a big number.
Let me give you an exact number. Give me 1 minute, Mr. Lawson.
The guide says 19. If you look at the front of the hotel guideline. Sorry.
Yeah, that's 18, but that was, as of January 1st, 18 full service.
You know, I know we can't do it this way, but it'd almost be nice to look at some other hotels that aren't this full service and see what the percent drop in revenue they have. And maybe we're only talking about equalizing, this class of hotel. I don't know.
Well, okay, Mr. Yates.
Ken, I don't see it that it's, I see this as an example of what we're looking at and addressing. We're not cherry picking this one. I think this is the tip of the iceberg on it.
We're cherry picking the appellants that fit in this classification. And I don't mean, and not the others. It's too bad. It's not a big number of these kinds of hotels that in February or March, given that they have nothing else to do early in the year, the staff couldn't have gone back and just looked at the actual decreases and compared it against their educated guesstimate before the 2021 came in, but they didn't. I guess they could have. It's not like single family houses where there's 30,000 of them to go through. It's a small number, but they didn't. We got what we got.
Okay, so I'm going to throw some numbers out there just so everybody's singing from the same sheet. So if the difference is $8,026,996, that would make, depending on where people are, the county's obviously at $97,685,700, the appellant's at $68,732. If you took that additional $8,000 deduction off of the original assessment, you would end up at $93,050,800. If you took it off the test, you'd be looking at $89,658,700. So
that's what I came up with.
Where are people? Mr. Penaranda.
Again, like Ken was saying, I mean, I'm not really comfortable making an extra deduction based on just this particular case. We're going to see that some of the other hotels, they have no complaint on the below the line deductions. So just to satisfy one particular case, I don't think it's proper to just start picking numbers from one to the other. I think if we're going to stabilize it, we should use some of the guidelines if it's necessary. In some cases, we use actual numbers, but of course, in this case, it's going to be ridiculous if we use the actual numbers. So again, I'm okay with the revised assessment. I think, like you pointed out, the value itself, dropping from almost 150 million from last year to this year, it reflects what hotels have done. So again, I'm okay with the revised assessment.
All right, and Ken, you are as well? Yes, okay, yeah. So that's, I believe, 3 of us that are okay. Mr. Yates?
I will go that way too.
Okay.
All right, I was for the 89,658,700.
Off the test. Okay, so you got one there because, like I said, this is if we're not in agreement, it's going back to the original assessment. So, and I don't think any of us want to do that.
Mm-mm.
So,
I think that's exactly why.
okay, all right. Then that being said, I think I don't know where Mary Hogan is.
I agree with what Jose said. I'm fine with the county's revised.
Okay. All right, then I'm going to go ahead and motion to accept the county's revised assessment of $97,685,700.
Okay.
I'll second.
Motion a second by Ms. Hogan. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
So it's no Greg and no Barnes. So it is 5-2. The county's revised assessment of $97,685,700 is confirmed. Okay. The second case on the agenda is RPC 35001-375. The property's at 1300 Richmond Highway. Mr. Warren.
Real
Yes.
quick before we start, and I want to confirm with Irving, but I believe in all these cases, column F is the revised, not a test. That was done at the first level. Just if that makes any difference with your voting, because as you made the comment, if we don't agree, it goes to the original. And I believe column F on all of these is the new actual assessment. Is that correct?
Yeah, these are the recommended revisions from the county.
The recommended revision.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right. Back to the agenda item. RPC 35001-375 at 1300 Richmond Highway. Mr. Warren, you can start with your 8 minutes.
I'm going to start this one quickly and then kick to Blake. As stated, the county made the assumption that 65% loss is correct for COVID. And now that they've gotten the income statements, they're going to realize that it appears on all 19 full service hotels, that number was too low. Although we're seeing cases where the value dropped by 40%, it seems dramatic. The income's down 90% and the market is completely on its head. A comment was made, if there was a buyer, they'd pay more than this, but the fact is there is not a buyer. These properties, properties aren't selling because there is a lack of buyers out there. There's a lack of interest in buying a asset with all the questions. And in order to buy those, it would take cap rates that we haven't seen since 2010. So the ones that are transacting are the ones that are going back to the banks that are foreclosing and then either being run, going to auction or they're figuring out what to do with them. They're going into receivership. So in a case like this, what we do on an apartment building is point out, you get the 2020 information and we use the 2020 information. And that 2020 information is then made to make a change at the Board of Equalization. That's new information. What luckily hasn't happened is said, well, we can't use new information because then all these appeals that use the 2020, we'd have to go back and fix all the 2019. We can't control that not all 19 have appealed, but my guess is all 19 will have appealed. And if it's determined this is the right thing to do, this is the right change to make, but it's a lot to change and we can't change them all, they will eventually most likely get changed if it's seen that the 65% is not the correct number. And the fact is that of the 5 cases we have today, it's becoming clear that 65%, it's not, what they did was they took 65% of the revenue and said that this is what the loss is going to be. And then on every one of these cases, now this isn't as dramatic as the last one, the losses weren't 12.1 million, the losses were 13.6 million. And maybe if we saw that in the first one and said, well, it's a 1.5 million, that's not as big of a pill to swallow as compared to if they were all 8 million. I understand that it is a big pill to swallow, but at the end of the day, that's the correct way to value these properties. That's the correct thing to do. Now, this one's also Crystal City, which, as Mr. Hoffman pointed out, gets the bump from the Amazon effect. But we're talking about the Amazon effect that happens in years 2 through 20, and we're looking 2 to 3 years in the future. But in this, we can't look what's happening in 2021 for the losses that the hotel's incurring and what the new norm looks like. The new norm on hotels, I think we can all agree, is that the 2021 income will not look anything like the 2019. Yet the income being used on this property is $1,500 more than the 2019 income. And it's so how the property did in 2019, we're saying that's how we're going to do in 21, but we're going to lose 65% of the income, even though we lost 75% of the income last year. And the risk associated with that is about 10% more, or about 8% more risky than it was the year prior. Because 50 basis points might seem like a lot, but when you go from an 8 to an 8.5, that's a very small change. Fairfax County, we saw hotels go down by over 50% across the board in some situations. We had a hotel that went from 160 million to 60 million. We're seeing that everywhere because the hotel market has been decimated. Just to say, I took 65%, that's what I use for everything. I now see that that number is wrong. Historically, when we have numbers that are wrong with presented new information, the board has been overwhelmingly willing to say, hey, this number's wrong, let's make the change. I don't understand a reluctancy to say, this number is wrong, but we can't make a change because then the other people that didn't appeal don't have the right to get it changed. Now, this owner appealed, and the next owner appealed, the next owner appealed, and I'm sure we're not the only 5 of the 19. Like I said, all 19 of them are going to appeal unless they're sleeping behind the wheel and they've already lost the property. They don't really care what happens to the taxes. So that's my soapbox, my first soapbox of 2021. Potentially my last, but as Mary knows, probably not. But I'll kick it to Blake to talk to the details of the case. But what it comes down to is, I think we all universally agree that the 65% isn't correct. It's just, can we change it, or should it, or can you change it, or should it be changed? And I think this is another example to show the last case wasn't just a cherry pick. This case, and if you want to fast forward to the next case, and to Barnes's question, what about, is it only full service? Well, we have a courtyard that's coming up in a couple cases, and that was off too. So it's all the hotels are off on the 65%. We have no support of why 65% was picked, but they said it's 65. We put it in our guidelines, so that's what it is. Unlike normally, the guidelines come from everybody's INEs come together, and we get a rent rolls, we get income statements, and they say these all came together and it gave us a 5% vacancy. So everybody gets 5% vacancy. That's what the guidelines are for. Here, the guidelines, they said, we're going to pick 65%, put it in the book. There's nothing that supports that 65% that's in that book. And now that we know it's wrong, there shouldn't be a reluctance to change that 65 because it's in the book. So I'll defer the rest of my time to Blake. Blake, you're on mute. You got anything else?
Yeah, sorry about that. And this is the courtyard, correct? Case that we're speaking on. Just want to make sure I'm talking about the right case real quick.
No, this is the Crystal City Embassy Suites.
Oh, this is Embassy Suites. Okay. Yeah, and again, this is going to be the same issue. It's really the below the line deduction. The county's 65% of 12 million. The actual loss was 13.6 million from 19 to 20. It was 1.6 million in total revenue, and represented 73%. The next case will be 78%. There's one case that's kind of in line with that 65%, and I can tell you, we have 5 properties, 4 of them are full service. That's almost 25%. You'll see that, 80% of those full service hotels, of the 25% total full service hotels in the property, are well above that that 65% threshold. So I don't know what other owners are reporting, but I can tell you we have a lot of properties that we review in surrounding jurisdictions, in Fairfax County, in Prince William. I haven't seen anything below. I don't think the 4th property that we'll talk about, the AVR, is the lowest, and that's right in line with that 65%. Everything else is 70% and higher. Most of them 80% in lost revenue. So what I think you'll see is the county had said that, they're basing their 65% revenue deduction based off mass appraisal, the information that they received prior to year end. But we've got 4 out of 5 properties here of the again, 44 total hotels, 18 full service hotels that are well above that 65% threshold. And I would imagine, I can't imagine that, if you took the average of all those, that the lost revenue would be 65%, just based off of what we're presenting here in these 5 cases, which is showing preponderance that the lost revenue is well beyond that 65% lost revenue. So again, that's the main issue of this case. The revision column is, again, all they changed from the original assessment was the reserves. Historically, it's been reported at 5%. Originally, it was at 3.9%. But really what it comes down to, again, is the lost revenue. Actuals are 73%, county's using 65%, which calculates, the difference between the actuals and their estimate is approximately, almost 2 million, 10.8 million, or excuse me. I might be referencing the wrong one. Sorry, 13.6 million to 12 million. So about $1.5 million. And that's all I have to present. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chikas for the county, please.
I'll start out on this one. So I wanted just to speak to our process. As we stated, we looked at the transit occupancy taxes that we always receive to try to gauge where our properties were performing. We didn't use any of the I&E information that's being presented for this year, meaning what we received as of March of 2021. That keeps being referenced to how all the information that the agents have are showing 70%. Again, that's not information that we had when we analyzed hotels and came up with the below the line deduction. We looked at the STAR reports, taking into consideration occupancy for the different hotel types in Arlington County, and again, the TOT reports. Based off the information we had, we developed this 65% for this hotel segment, and we also have different deduction rates for other hotel segments. It keep referencing like we're incorrect. We're not incorrect because we're using a uniform approach to valuing these hotel properties. In that uniform approach, we're making an assessment for these properties, which is we're looking at the history of the properties and projecting for 2021. There is no incorrectness in an assessment estimate because it's based off the information that we had. So there is no, the appellant is not proving incorrect or flawed. Rather, there's no flaw in our assessment approach. We're not using incorrect information because we're using information that we have. Again, we're uniforming our approach. That's something that should be considered, especially when you're talking about equalization. The uniformity is the fact that we're applying 65% below the line deduction to all of these full service hotels. Another thing that I want to talk about, again, I know that it came up about the cap rate and we talked about PwC. One of the things I did do is go back and look at PwC 2019 publications, which we had. If you have fourth quarter PwC publication, they don't have a hotel section in there. So the third quarter is the best section for 2020. When you look at 2019 third quarter compared to 2020 third quarter, the cap rate for full service actually went down by 13 basis points. For limited mid-scale and economy section, the cap rate went up by 35 basis points. Luxury upscale lodging increased by 78 basis points, and selective service increased by 19 basis points. For an average of all PwC cap rates of a 30 basis point increase on the hotel section. So I think that more than supports our increase on the hotel cap rates. For full service, there was a 50 basis point increase. Again, we wanted to point out that we looked at PwC and RERC. And if you look at RERC's third quarter comparisons, the average cap rate increase was actually 50 basis points. That's taking into consideration national first tier, investor surveys, East Region first tier, East Region second tier, East Region third tier, and the Washington, D.C. market. So again, I think that supports our cap rate change. The sales that we had, we did not use because, as Greg pointed out, it was Residence Inn in Pentagon City and the Americana, which were high sale prices, well above the original assessed value of those properties. Other than that, we didn't have any hotel sales to go off of. So I'll let Chris talk more about this property so I don't take up too much of his time.
Thank you, Irving. Yeah, so again, just sort of jumping on what Irving was talking about, essentially what Mr. Chitlick would like us to do is take the information that we received in April and then revisit the guidelines that were published or put out in October, November, and adjust all full service types. Otherwise, what he's suggesting is look at each individual case as they're presented to you. We've included a negative 65% adjustment below the line. On the last case, the percentage of total revenue is 79% below the line adjustment. In this case, it's a 73% below the line adjustment. So there's not going to be uniformity if all you're doing is adjusting each individual property's 1 year loss. That's not mass appraisal standards. So as Irvin pointed out, that doesn't make it incorrect. It makes it just a flawed opinion of value. As we also noted, the appellants are asking for a 49% drop in value year over year. We just think that's a bit aggressive. Our assessment revision is a 32% drop. Again, fair, prudent, and equalized with other property types. when we're looking at the property, again, the appellants mirrored our numbers column for column. We did again adjust the FF&E as historically they reported 5%. We were at 4.5% as of January 1. We did adjust that. And again, the biggest difference is 150 basis points on the cap rate and a 73% adjustment by the appellant below the line as compared to our 65%, which again is equalized with other full service types. Looking at the numbers, we do believe that the revision should be confirmed at 39,895,800. Again, given the same information we used on the last case, we do believe this is very much in line. Again, following the standards that we put forth, the mass appraisal, the idea that the value put forth by the appellant doesn't make ours incorrect. It just makes it another opinion of value. We just believe it's too aggressive. So the county should be confirmed at the revised value of 39,895,800. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Before we go to questions from the board, I just want to read something from our manual just to clarify some of the comments that were made last time. But the board is free to act whether or not a specific complaint has been made. In fact, the board has the duty to correct known erroneous assessments even though no complaint has been made. A board has the power and the obligation to correct those erroneous groups of assessments to achieve equality and uniformity of taxation. Under 58.13379, such an equalization does not require an application by any aggrieved property owner, but the property owner must be given notice to whether or not it's been increased or decreased. So I just want to make sure that everybody understands that before you ask your questions, but just because somebody has an appeal doesn't mean it won't be fixed, or that you don't have to necessarily fix something because the rest of the group would not be affected. So questions from board members? No questions? No? Okay. All right, Mr. Chicas, do you have anything else to tell us?
No, ma'am. Just again, in accordance with the last case, in accordance with how we've valued all of the mass appraisal hotels, and specifically in this case, full service, we do believe the revised value of 39,895,800 should be confirmed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Warren or Mr. Chicas, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
You're on mute, Jeremy.
Yep. I believe you meant Mr. Chitlick.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Thank you. Sorry.
So they keep talking about the third quarter PwC. That report also states the lodging industry has been severely impacted by COVID-19 and will be in recovery mode for at least the next 2 years. It says on the exact same page where they're talking about how rosy the cap rates are. This really comes down to exactly really what Mary mentioned. If we agree that it's not correct, we should change it. And Chris, one thing that he didn't do on this one, which is the first time I've ever seen him do it, is he doesn't show the percentage drops in column E next to it. He always shows the drops. But in case you're wondering, it dropped 73%. The total revenue dropped 73% from the year prior. Usually there's a negative number there and shows that he did in the last case, but he doesn't do it on the next 4. Yes, the value is down from the prior year, but not down anywhere near the amount that the property's down. And as the report that they're relying so much on shows, this is not a 1-year thing. This is a 2-year thing, and we all know that already. We are more than halfway through 2021, and we know that things aren't back to where they were in 19. Yet the value, the NOI being used here, is higher than the 2019 value.
Okay.
But it's really that 65%, which is not a guideline that they grab from anywhere. It's really a number they pick. In Irving's point of, we can't be wrong because it's an assessment. I have other comments on, but I don't have time for it, so I'll save it.
Thank you. All right, it's just among the board members. Where is everybody on this? Mr. Hoffman.
I'm more okay with this county assessment on this one than the previous case, just because it is fee simple land. It's a straightforward building. It is immediately adjacent to land that's sold for about twice the price of what the assessment of this property is, an older hotel. So, I think that gives some reliability to the $39 million estimate that it's probably over market for the value of that land.
Okay. Mr. Matskin?
I want to make two quick points for us. One is that I thought, as usual, but even more than that, the arguments from both parties were really very impressive and professional. And I, for one, and I'm sure I share your feelings, appreciate that. And second, I keep thinking about the next level of appeal. This is a small number of fairly deep-pocketed appellants, both who are active and those who could be potential appellants based on Mary's reading, that everybody is involved, even if you don't appeal, and perhaps a judicial remedy at the next level is the way they might want to make their case, because they haven't, as I repeat from last time, haven't made it to me as a board member, but they do have further appeal options that they may wish to pursue or not.
Okay. Other comments? Mr. Yates?
Something I heard in the discussions, and I back to the bigger picture, the loss of revenue, the appellants indicated has ranged on their cases of their clients from 65 to 85%. That doesn't allow us to just pick a number that we would adjust the county's number with. The county used 65% based on the information they had. I feel a little bit better about that. They took a number, they targeted it, they applied it equally. And I think if we picked anything else, be it 85% or 75% or 80 like the last case, we'd be throwing a dart. So I'm more with what, going back to this case, I'm more with what the county's come up with.
Okay. Mr. Lawson, you had your hand up?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Yeah, I was just gonna share with Ken that, if anyone's going to go to court, I imagine they would wait 2 more years because then they can go, when you file a court action, you can look at the last 2 years plus the year that you have. So court action, my guess would be postponed for 2 years. So it makes what we do here, I think, a little more important.
Okay. All right. Any other? No? Would somebody like to make a motion? Mr. Hoffman?
You're mute.
Mute, please. Turn your microphone. Thank you.
The motion would be, I guess, to confirm the county's reduced assessment at $39,895,800.
Okay.
Second.
Okay. Mary Hogan is the second again. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that's unanimous. The county's revised number of 39,895,800 is confirmed. Okay, I've had one request to take a break, and it's up to the board. Do you want to take a break before the 3rd? It's 10:15.
Okay.
So let's take a 5-minute now, and then we'll wrap up the last 3, since the first one took a little longer. Okay. Everybody would turn off their microphones and camera till they come back. That'd be great. Thank you. Okay, I think we need Mr. Chitlick, Matskin, and I don't see Mr. Warren.
I'm here.
Oh, you are? Okay. Oh, you needed to talk to click up. There's Ken.
I'm here as
There's
well.
Mr. Chitlick. Okay, perfect. We've got everybody back. Thank you, everyone. Okay, the third case on the agenda is RPC 360160004, property located at 1800 Richmond Highway. Mr. Warren, if you want to start and tell us about the property.
Yeah, so this is the full service hotel, the Westin Crystal City that I thought was on the docket for the fourth case, and this is the one that of the 4 full service hotels out of the 5 that we're bringing forth to the board today, reported the lowest loss in revenue, which was 65%, and the actual loss of revenue is a little bit above the 65% estimate from the county. So actual loss of revenue from 19 to 20 was 9,825,618, which is 65%. And the county's revised assessment, they're using 9,746,495, which is 65% estimate of total revenue. This property, as the others, they're in close proximity to each other, as well as the Crystal City Metro Station or Pentagon City Metro Station, and the current assessment or recommended assessment by the county is $53,364,200, and our value is approximately $45 million, which again is supported by column G in the hotel and expense summary. This one is a little bit different in that this is the only one you'll see from the other 4 hotel cases that we'll bring forth today that the county was trending in their original assessment much higher on their total revenue, and NOI was trending up for the 2021 assessment initially, which we felt was incorrect, and what we felt to use in our column G was the most recent stabilized reporting year of 2019. And you'll see that reflected in column G. The county agreed and made revisions in column F to reflect the lower income that was reported in that year. And again, the only difference, those are the main differences that were then reflected in the revised assessment that you'll see at 53 million. In additional support to our current assessment value, our packet included, let's see if I can find the page number, included a third-party appraisal that was completed, and the valuation date is for the fee simple value as of June 30th of 2020, and that can be found on page starts on page 125, and you'll see that their estimate of value as of June 30th of 2020 is 45 million. So we asked the board to take this information into consideration of their 2021 assessment for the subject property, which again falls in line with our requested value of 44,926,500. Again, this is one where the total lost revenue is in line with the county's revised projection, initial and revised, and I guess the equalized lost revenue amount that they've applied uniformly in their evaluation of all hotel assets, at least for full service hotels in the county. However, they have made appropriate revisions for total revenue and expenses in their revised column. But again, we're asking consideration for the board in the both the appraisal and the appellant's revised column G of 45 million. Thank you.
I want to point something out here because the big conversation has been equalization and making things in line. And all of these properties today are very close to each other. First, the Crystal Gateway Marriott assessed at 144,000 per key. The Embassy Suites 153,000 per key. The Marriott Courtyard Crystal City 151,000 per key. The Doubletree, 108,000 per key, and then this one, 255,000 per key, over $100,000 more per room than the others. And after getting the information, went back and tried to figure out why. And I think we have an answer. So the Crystal Gateway, as Chris pointed out, they renovated the property, put $32 million into it in 2017, 2018. Like all other hotels we have, the year built there is 1982, and the effective age is also 1982. That is the same for the Embassy Suites, where they match the effective and the year built. Same with the Courtyard, same with the Doubletree. But on this property, the effective age, the year built is 1984, but the effective age is changed to 2009. The result is that this property, with its competitive set, its Star Report, its peers, are the ones we're looking at today. So we can actually look at those values, although we still feel those values are overassessed. This property is assessed at over $100,000 more per room than all of those other subject properties. And the income doesn't support it, because the income is $330,000 last year. This property doesn't perform so much better than all those places, all those other ones. Furthermore, if you look at the Crystal Gateway Marriott, the RevPAR was 151 and ADR was 194 in 2019, and the subject is 141 and 173. So the Crystal Gateway Marriott actually does better. They get an extra $20 a night as compared to the subject property, yet the subject property is assessed almost 50% higher than the other property. So we talk about equalization, uniformity, keeping things in line. Well, this property is such a high outlier as compared to the other ones that there's no justification for it. The only other thing I want to point out, and again, it was made in the comments of, they use 65% complete. We can't just throw a dart at the dartboard and pick 75 or 85. We're not asking you to do that at all. We're asking you to use the actual number. Just like you don't use a uniform number for room revenues or operating expenses, you use the actual numbers that are in place. The county doesn't say, okay, everybody's room revenue is $300 per room, so everybody gets $300 a room. You look at the individual hotel's performance and see how it does, and then use something in line with the actual. That's what the county does. That's what we do. That's what the Board of Equalization has historically done. We're asking for that same thing in that COVID adjustment below the line. The reason I'm harping on it is because Barnes is exactly right. I mean, in 3 years, every one of these ends up in court because they're wrong, and they're wrong next year. So while it's being saved now, it's going to be a headache for not you all, but for us and for the county for sure. So we'd obviously much rather get it right at a step like this. But as Ken pointed out, we have that vehicle in the future, which we'll be sure to use when the property is overassessed. But on this property, we talk about equalization in line. How does it compare to others? I see no justification to change the effective age on this one to 2009 when we just showed you 2 cases before, and the next 2 cases where they use the effective age that's in line is the same as the year built, even though those properties have been renovated in the last few years. Both the comments on the last 2 properties is one had $32 million of renovation and the other had 10. So that's, I think, the error. But either way, I'd love to have some type of explanation from the county. I'm not going to hold my breath that why is this property worth, the others are worth 150 a key and equalized and in line with each other. Why is this one 255,000 per key? It doesn't make. I think it's 70% higher, the assessment of this one as compared to those. So I'd love to get an answer to that, because the owner asked and we owe him an answer. And right now we just said we have no idea.
Okay, that's
it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chikas for the county, please.
Yeah, it's interesting to us as well, because we were never asked that question during the department hearing that was held with Mr. Warren. So if the owner was curious as to why, they should just ask us. So we can inform Mr. Chitlick, the effective age has no bearing on hotel valuations whatsoever. So we'll keep that short and simple. In regards to this case and how it relies upon the others, much like we talked about, the below-the-line deduction by the appellant is all over the place. In this case, it actually happens to align perfectly with the county at negative 65% of total revenue. We would point out in the 3-year summary sheet that the appellant's number, NOI, is actually higher by almost $120,000 projected than is the county's. The county's, again, looking at the historical operations of the property and feels that the revision is much more in line Again, prudent, fair, not quite achieving 2019's numbers, but more so in the 2018 realm. Interesting to note, if you take the appellant's NOI and cap it at the appropriate cap rate, 8.543, and even use their below line deductions, you actually get a value that's higher than the county's revision. So that tells you their opinion of value when they say ours is wrong. We just don't agree with theirs. Again, they're going for a 34% drop year over year. Ours is at 22% year over year. Again, much more prudent, in line with similar property types. Again, with all the full service properties, hotels that we have in the county, they got a negative 65% of total revenue. Again, that matches with the appellant's number. This one is really just a matter of the 150 basis points that the appellants added to their cap rate. We do believe that was added incorrectly. There's no support for that, RERC or otherwise. As we pointed out in the previous cases this morning, we already added 50 basis points as of January 1st of the new year. So we do believe our cap rate is equitable and fair. We do believe that we're both using negative 65% of total revenue. And again, as pointed out, if you use the appellant's NOI and the county's cap rate and the appellant's below line adjustment, you get a value higher than our revision recommended value. That being said, we do believe that the county should be confirmed at the revised value of $53,364,200. Irving, anything to add?
No.
So that will be our submission. Ask any questions, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions from board members? Mr. Huffman.
Yeah, you know, I went into the appraisal because I thought it was a very well done appraisal, very comprehensive. And I just wanted to ask the appellant, there's a capital expense projected at 16 million. If you could kind of get into what that is, what the kind of pressing needs of the building is. That structural issues? Is that mechanical? Where's that $16 million figure coming from?
Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of information on that. That's something I was trying to get confirmation on prior to this hearing, and we were unable to do so on exactly what those renovations cost were. It's reportedly going to be over the next 2 years. And in that, like, as you were saying, the appraisal is deducting that 16 million in consideration of the value. But I cannot get into specifics because I just haven't gotten confirmation from the owner, unfortunately, as of the hearing date.
Okay. Mr. Metzger.
I have a question for the department. In 4 of the 5 cases today, the department's revised total revenue is identical to the appellant's 2021 estimation, I&E estimation. This is the 5th one. Your revenue is actually lower than theirs. Not by big numbers, but it stands out because it's 1 of 5 that's different. Could you explain that, please?
Yes, Mr. Minskin, it's actually the reverse. Our numbers come out January 1st, and then their numbers come out after ours. So theirs are actually mirroring ours. The difference in the 3 previous cases was that the FF&E was actually revised upward to reflect the historical operations. So their numbers, their pro formas come out sometime in March or whenever they submit their applications. So they actually are matching our numbers. Just happens to be the difference in the cap rate.
We disagree on this one a bit. In fact, we're more optimistic than you were in this one, as it turns out.
That would be the case.
I didn't know that. Thanks, Bob.
Okay, other questions? No? Okay, Mr. Chikas, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Yes, ma'am. So again, as we've seen in the previous cases, really has been a difference in the cap rates as opined by the appellant and the county. In this case, we're both at a negative 65% adjustment of total revenue. It's really that 150 basis points that were added without support by the appellant. We do believe that their adjustment was too aggressive. So we do believe that the county's revision should be confirmed at $53,364,200. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Warren, if you take a minute, or Mr. Chitlick, take a minute to wrap up.
Yes, so I pointed out in the opening that the property is assessed 100,000 a key more than all the comparables, which we also appealed today. And Chris responded with, well, they didn't ask us that at the first level. And if they had, I'd be happy to explain why. And I got my pen ready to hear the explanation. And then he just went on to the next topic. He never told us why this property would be assessed 100,000 more than any of the neighboring properties. In fact, the property's ADR and RevPAR are lower than the Marriott. They're built around the same time. The Marriott is recently renovated, and this property is assessed 100,000 per key more than those properties. So if there's ever an equalization, we talk about, well, if we use 65% deduction of total here, and other ones we use 70, it's that equalization. Equalization should be taxes paid in assessed value. And the taxes paid in assessed value on this property are 70% higher than a property they compete directly with. The Westin and the Marriott are right next to each other, essentially. They compete with. Why would one be paying taxes 60, 70% higher than the other one? And it's because of the assessment. You see the actual expenses of the property are 79%. The county's using 58% on this property. On the Marriott, they're using 74% expenses. So that's mostly where it comes from. I thought Chris would lay that out and explain it. But this property should not be 111,000 more per key than the direct comp that does better.
Okay, thank you. Okay, it's just among the board members. Where is everybody on this? Mr. Hoffman.
I just, the county's doesn't have with office buildings and whatnot, we have effective age that feeds into the cap rate. And it's kind of odd that the hotel process doesn't include that. That's probably why we see kind of these differences in per key. You end up with possible major capital expenses that could be affecting the value of the property. I just don't know it. I tried to go through that appraisal in the application to figure out what it was. I'd be willing to do a below the line deduction if there was something like, we've done it in the past. There's a major structural issue in the garage. It needs to be repaired. That's why it's different from another property across the street. But there was nothing that really called out what this was. So I don't have really enough to move me to try to make a change from where the county's at right now.
Okay, Mr. Lawson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Hoffman, sometimes the hotel company under the franchise agreement requires modernization every 5 years or whatever. And so, just speculating what the future capital improvement is, it could be new signs. It could, who knows? This is, to everyone's surprise, maybe this is one where I thought the county was right on.
Okay. Any other opinions or contrary to that?
No.
Okay, somebody'd like to make a motion then?
I'll go ahead and move that we confirm the revised assessment to 53,364,200.
Okay, and a second, Mr. Matzkin. Okay. Motion and seconds on the table. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, 7-0. The county's confirmed at the revised number of 53,364,200. Okay. Next case on the agenda is RPC 34027-026. The property is located at 2899 27th Street South. Mr. Warren, if you'd start with your 8 minutes and tell us about the property.
Thank you. Yes, this is the Courtyard Crystal City. The original assessment is $41,277,415. The county is recommending a revised value of $39,600,300. This property was originally built in 1989. It's 272 total rooms. It's a courtyard, so not a true full service hotel, a select service hotel. And you'll see, again, as we've been talking about decreases in total revenue caused by COVID year over year from 2019. that this property experienced a 2020 decrease total of 10,882,344, or 78%. The county is again adjusting for 65% below the line in their COVID adjustment, and so there's approximately a $2 million difference between the county's adjustment below the line and the petitioners and the actuals. The actual revenue, total amount of revenue that can be pinpointed to the loss year over year. This was a property prior to COVID that was stabilized. We were in agreement with the county's initial, or same as the revised column F, their estimates for revenue total and total expenses. This is one where they again adjusted their reserves rate from 3.9% to 5%, which was the actual historical reporting of reserves in prior years. And that's the difference from column D to F is with regard to reserves. Again, we would hope the board consider the actual lost revenue that was experienced in 2020, and that's the main difference between the appellant's case and ours.
The only other thing to add is that this is like said, a select service hotel, and assessed higher than the full service Marriott that we previously discussed. I know that didn't carry much weight in discussion or questions or rebuttal from the county, but what equalization is about is the value in the taxes. And when the Crystal Gateway is assessed at 144,000 and the subject is assessed at about 152,000, and one of them gets $200 per room and the other gets $120 per room, you would think the one that gets $200 a room would be more valuable. And I think that at least would love to hear, and I know it's not my call, but would love to hear why would a select service hotel be more valuable than a full service hotel that's located in the same location that performs better. But either way, the actual NOI here is again a negative. We've seen an enormous drop in revenue from 13.8 to just under 3 million. And again, for 5 out of 5 cases. Now, granted, the last one was very close, but they were still low by a couple, like $100,000. The 65% is not getting it. And here's proof that it's not just getting it on the full service, it's also the select service. They've missed the mark. I also understand that you've all have made a determination on whether that should be reduced or not, and it will take further look. But I do think it's important to at least understand, are select services hotels worth more than full service hotels? Guidelines would indicate they aren't. Cap rate's higher here than a full service. The room revenue's lower than the full service. The ADR is lower than the full service. The RevPAR is lower, yet the value's higher. So that's the last point.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chikas for the county, please.
Yes, ma'am. So in continuing with sort of the problem with the appellants trying to peg a below the line adjustment is we're back to an 80% of total revenue adjustment loss in again, 125 basis point jump. So it harkens back to that first case of making it inequitable amongst the similar property types. As Mr. Chitlick Warren pointed out, this is a select service type. As the board knows, select service received the same negative 65% adjustment as did the full service, according to the information we had when the guidelines were developed. And again, it's a similar thing, whereas the adjustment the appellant makes would call for a 44% drop in value year over year. Just too aggressive. Ours is again a negative 29% drop. Much more in line with the other properties that we've already heard today. Again, prudent, fair, equitable, with the negative 65% drop, with the increase of, I believe, it's 75% basis points as of January 1st for select service. We do believe that the revision should be confirmed at $39,600,300. Irving, anything to add?
I don't have anything for this one.
So again, just based on the numbers that we're looking at, the appellant has mirrored our numbers from top to bottom. It's just the additional 125 basis points and 15% increase in COVID adjustment below the line. We do believe that the standards we've used for all other property types that are similar should be upheld in this case as well. And the revised value of $39,600,300 should be confirmed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, questions from board members on this one? No? All right, Mr. Chicas, do you have anything else to tell us on this case?
No, ma'am, I'll keep the time moving. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Warren or Mr. Chitlick, if you have anything in the last minute?
Yeah, I still can't figure out why a select service hotel is more valuable than a full service hotel that does better. They both have a negative NOI. He hasn't answered, he hasn't responded, he hasn't explained that. And I think in equalization, that is a very, very large factor. I'm gonna keep hammering that home, hoping that eventually he'd tell us. But again, the revenue's less, the cap rate's higher. They both are producing a loss. So which would you rather own? Would you rather own a full service Crystal City Marriott or a Courtyard? Because according to the assessor, the Courtyard's more valuable, and I think that's plain error. And he hasn't told us why that would be the case. That's not typically the case in any county I've ever worked. Blake, anything else? I think we got another 10 seconds.
No, I mean, again, we're using the actual lost revenue. It's information that is prior to the lien date, prior to the valuation date, and in other property types, it's considered, and this is the actual reported losses for each of these properties. They vary, yes, but all of them have been above the 65% that's been applied to all the hotel properties in the county.
Okay. All right. It's just among the board then. Where is everybody? Mr. Metzgen.
I too have been ruminating on the apparent differences in different kinds of properties and key, valuation per key. I think in the last case, and I'm going to apply it to this one, I think Mr. Chitlick was just right that the operating expenses were different in the last case. And I went through all 5, and in some cases significantly different, meaning significantly lower. So we're assessing, of course, we're basing on NOIs. And what's an NOI? It's a gross estimation of profitability. The last case was more highly profitable because in large part, probably not exclusively, their operating expenses were less. I don't know if they're more efficient or they have better behaving guests or whatever, but I think the numbers add up and that explains it. In this case, where there's an apparent disconnect between a lesser type of property, select service versus full service, I also saw that the operating expenses were less than some of these full service establishments. And it could be, and therefore I, not being a hotelier, certainly could be that this is more valuable per room because it's more profitable per room. That I'm guessing at, but it makes sense. And again, I'm deriving it from the last case where it's very clear. So I'm feeling as comfortable as I can be with this case as it was with the others.
Okay. Others? Mr. Lawson.
Yes, thank you. Ken, I agree with what you just said. And I think a lot of income success depends upon, the reservation system that the hotel throughout the country has. And it could be that, I forget which one this is, but you call this is Marriott, you call Marriott and they say, hey, we got the one, and they send you to this location. That could have a lot to do with it. And it could be that full service is full service, but it's also very expensive to run it as full service. Where I probably am going to diverge from your opinion is I do think we should go with the actual adjustment that the applicant is suggesting, lowering it to $37,588,600 for the reasons expressed before, and I won't repeat those reasons.
Okay. Other folks? Mr. Hoffman?
Yeah, I mean, I just echo Barnes's comments on the reservation system because I've had it explained to me by Marriott themselves, the kind of synergies that exist when you have a courtyard and a residence inn, and the way they do reservations. They end up being one of the most valuable flags to have in the industry. This is also a new building.
So where are you on value?
I'm with Barnes.
Right. Others? Mr. Penaranda?
Well, just like the first case, I know we're talking about, numbers, and I think both the appellant and the county are in the same line. I mean, the same numbers are on both column F and G. It's pretty much the same as the first case. We're looking at what the below the line deduction would be in the cap rate. And I don't think we are really necessarily looking at these hotels as per room value, because they're valued based on the income, I know for market purposes would be a different thing. But I'm okay with the assessment the way it is with the revised number.
Revised.
All right, Mr. Yates?
I'm okay with revised.
Okay, all right, would somebody like to make a motion?
I'll
Mr.
go ahead
Metz-
and move. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Kane.
Mr. Metzgen?
I move that we accept the department's revised assessment of $39,600,300.
I'll second that.
Okay, motion and a second by Mr. Penaranda. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, it's 4-2, and that's without Mr. Hoffman or Mr. Lawson. And Ms. Hogan had to step out of the meeting. So she's not voting. So it's a 4-2 vote to confirm the county's revised number of $39,600,300. Okay, and the last case on the agenda is Economic Unit 3500 206H, and that is the 11th Street South property. Mr. Warren, you can start with your 8 minutes.
Blake, you're on mute.
Blake.
Sorry about that. Thank you. This is the Crystal City Doubletree Hotel. This is another full-service hotel in Crystal City. It is comprised of one economic unit, but six individual tax parcels. Now, the initial assessment that we had was $69,118,700. I know the county's memo, their first page has it at $68,235,100. So I'm not sure where the discrepancy is there. If we're missing a parcel, it looks like all the parcels are there. But they are recommending a revision to $68,201,200. This is another older hotel originally built in 1973. It's a mid-scale full-service hotel, 627 total rooms. Similar to, again, the last 4 cases that we've discussed here. If you look with regards to the deduction that's being implemented below the line for COVID, the county is applying their full service guidelines of 65% estimated of total revenue. The first case that we discussed here, which was a full service hotel, we've reported that the actual lost revenue from 19 and 20 was 78%. The next hotel was 73%. That was also a full service hotel. The property that we just discussed, the select service courtyard, was 78%. And now this one, you'll find that the actual 2019 to 2020 loss in revenue was 75%, or $27,909,882. So all of these well above the 65% that's been applied uniformly to all hotels in the county. And we've showed with the exception of one that was right at 65% and still $100,000 over the total amount applied for the Westin Crystal City. That these four remaining hotels were well in excess of 65% that's being estimated below the line. Again, I think the only difference here that was made in the county's revised column F is everything stayed the same with regards to revenue, expenses, and reserves, is that they've added the bid rate in for the cap rate. Again, the main difference here is with regard to the deduction below the line, the county is applying a deduction below the line of $24,263,699, and we are requesting the board deduct the actual reported loss in revenue, which was $27,909,882. And again, that's really the basis of the case.
There appears to be an error in the calculation. If you take on page 1, if you add up all of those parcels, that's on page 1, it totals 69,044,800, which is what we had. But on page 3, it shows that it's actually the current assessment 68,235,100. So just as a point of clarification, I went further into to make sure that that front page is correct, but there's something weird going on with the numbers on how this went to PDF or something starting on page 20, where it's just a bunch of scrambled letters. So it doesn't allow that. It might not matter because the recommendation is correct at 28,201,200. I just wanted to point that out, that it appears there's an error on their page. We think there's a bunch of errors on their page 4, but that's one I think we could agree to as being an error on their page 4. Again, you've seen now 25% of the full service hotels in the county, and you've seen that all of them are the 65% is not enough. I also realize that you've decided on 3 of those that it's enough for this purpose, but it's still not enough. And the facts show here that it shouldn't be a $24.2 million deduct. It should be a $27.9 million deduct. And with the new information that was gained via the appeal, you now have that at your disposal. I also realize that it only takes one of you to flip in order to actually win one of these. So I've got a little more optimism, but the numbers are there. You've now seen enough of them, 5 of them, to show the number they used is not enough. Therefore, it should be adjusted, just like on any other line on the income. The only difference is normally on the lines of income, those are supported by all the INEs the county gets. This 65% per the guidelines appears to be just a number that was picked kind of out of the blue. It doesn't have any support of why they picked 65. There weren't income statements to say we're seeing that the properties have lost 65% of revenue, so that's uniform. They just picked 65, and I think you're now learning, but they learned back in April that 65 wasn't enough. So, like I said, it's the same case, but it's not a huge difference here. It's 3.7 million, but it's an error that's got to be fixed. And unfortunately, for everybody involved, I think it'll eventually be fixed later down the road, if not today. But it's something that has to be fixed because it's just flat out wrong. It's plain error.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chikas for the county, please.
Yes, as Mr. Chitlick has pointed out, this is our 5th case of the day, representing some percentage of the full service hotels, and you've confirmed all of them. We hope that you'll do the same. This case is very much the same as the others. Columns F and G, they're aligned until you get to the 150 basis point jump by the appellant and the 75% drop in total revenue. That equates to almost a $47 million drop year over year in value. It's 49% year over year. That's too aggressive. As we've seen with the other 4 cases, as we've seen with all full service and select service hotels in the county, they received mass appraisal methodology, in this case, a negative 65% to total revenue. We believe, as we've seen with the other 4 cases, this was done uniformly. This is prudent, it's fair, it's equitable. We do believe our revision of $68,201,200 should be confirmed as fair and equitable, much like the other 4 cases we've heard today. Irving, anything to add?
No, I think you explained it well. Nothing further to say.
Yeah, it's just a matter of the verbiage used, to suggest we're wrong or it's an error. I won't speak for the entire county, but I find it offensive. These are opinions of value. Obviously, they're made at the time of the information we have. As we suggested, what Mr. Chitlick would like is for us to take the information we gathered in April or May or whenever the people filed, and then readdress the guidelines that were done uniformly for the entire county in November. In this case, this is the point of the review, is the appellant can offer their opinion of value, however different it is from the opinion of the county. In this case, we just believe they're overreaching. 49% drop year over year is too aggressive. And that's really the reason why we go for uniformity, is that of the 4 cases we've seen so far, I believe at least 3 of them have had different adjustments below the line. That's why we can't do that with mass appraisals, because if we're going to adjust each one of them below the line, I believe Mr. Mateskin pointed out, we would need more appraisers to address each individual property at each individual review deadline to adjust them individually. When we're using mass appraisal standards, in this case, that negative 65% drop, we do that uniformly. And that's what we've seen with the other 4 cases today. And we believe that should be upheld on this revision as well. We do believe the county should be confirmed at 68,201,200. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions from board members? Mr. Matskin.
For the department, you said twice, I thought maybe I misheard it the first time, but I heard it correctly the second time, that it's a 49% drop year over year. That's in assessment, right?
And to be clear, that's what the appellant is requesting. Our assessment drop is 30%. 30%.
That's the word I missed. Thank you. That's it.
Okay, no other questions? Okay, Mr. Chikas, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
Yes, ma'am. Again, in accordance with the other 4 cases we've heard today, in accordance with the mass appraisal methodology, we've applied the negative 65% below the line adjustment uniformly. This again is number 4 of 5 cases, 5 of 5 cases, I should say, that we've done this. The others were upheld and confirmed. We do believe that using that same line of reasoning, that this should be confirmed as well at 68,201,200. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Warren, if you take a minute to wrap up.
This is Mr. Chitlick. It's Jeremy. I don't know why I said that. We mentioned, he said that's too aggressive to go as far as we did. He didn't mention that the income is down, the revenue is down 74.5% of the property. In the NOI, the owner used to take 8.2 million to the bank, and now they're cutting a check for 2.6 million. That's a big difference from income producing property to a property that's losing $2.6 million. He took offense. He was offended by me saying his assessment's wrong. I didn't mean to offend anybody. I think that the way they did it was incorrect, and that's not a personal attack on Chris, just like it's not a personal attack. He doesn't agree with my opinion of value, but they made a mistake. And I'm not saying they need to go into every property and say it's not 65%. I'm saying if you're going to take a below the line deduction, use the actuals, just like you're using the actuals to form your revenue, your expenses, your FF&E deduction. They're not using a mass, this is the expenses we're applying to everything. They're looking at a 3-year history and saying the expenses that I should use is this. That's all we're asking, to do the exact same thing, but do it below the line, where you're saying, I'll do that for the revenue. I'll do it for the expenses. I'll do it for the lease up. I'm not going to do it below the line because I got to do 65% complete, 65% deduction. It doesn't make any sense of why he would just pick 65% when now he's learned after the fact the 65 was not the right number. It should have been higher.
Okay, thank you. Okay, it's just among the board members. Mr. Lawson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I went and looked at the Charles E. Smith case that the Supreme Court decided, and it's in the package that we received from Wilkes Artist. And in that case, the court said the preference for uniformity of assessments must stop short of assessment at greater than fair market value. Article 10, Section 2 of the Constitution of Virginia protects all taxpayers from assessments in excess of fair market value. The court then says when a taxpayer is able to show that actual rents and expenses are ignored or given only token consideration in forming an assessment, he will have carried his burden of overcoming the presumption of correctness. So, you know, again, I go back to what I argued in the very first case this morning. I think we should go with the below the line deduction of the actual drop in revenue. And in this case, I'm going to probably be alone with this, I would come up with $64,657,100. Thank you.
Okay. Others? Mr. Matzkin.
I'm reluctant to say this whole Supreme Court notion that makes, I guess, fairness sense that you can't assess a property at over fair market value. I don't know how that could possibly apply given how few sales there are and how up in the market it is, how up in the air, I'm sorry, the market is for hotels in particular. It's a nice aspiration, but I agree with it, but I can't imagine it applies, that we know what the fair market value of these things are, which is why I assume the county bumped up in each case the cap rate. But again, this isn't, you know, a natural disaster where the coastal shelf fell off and all of a sudden, you know, we're in danger of being flooded. This is a temporary, knowable disaster, but it's not permanent. And if it takes time to catch up and get it right, then it does. That's my redundancy. Thank you.
Okay. Any others? Mr. Penaranda?
Yeah, I think, yeah, the points that are made are very valid, but I don't think we can deviate from the role that we have to equalize. You know, we have to make sure that pretty much every other property that is similar to this is treated equally. And I also wanted to point out something that Mr. Chitlick said, that there were errors in the numbers. I went back to the first page to all the RPCs on this economic unit, and the numbers that are there are correct. It adds up to the 68,201,200. So I'm not sure what the difference was when Mr. Chitlick added, but I checked twice actually the numbers that are there, and they are correct. But in this case, I'm okay as the previous cases with the revised assessment.
Okay. Anyone, Mr. Hoffman?
I mean, I would support the reduction that Barnes proposed and just kind of make the comment that hotel market is probably more volatile than other real estate classes, including apartments, office, and whatnot. So as a board and as the Department of Real Estate assessment should be prepared to make more rapid changes. So that's why we're seeing, you know, already a drastic reduction at the department level. I don't think it needs to be cut significantly from there, but I think what Barnes has proposed is fair.
Okay. All right. Would somebody like to make a motion?
I'll go ahead and move that we confirm the revised assessment of 68,201,200.
Okay, do I have a second? A second by Mr. Matzkin. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that's 4-2 without Mr. Hoffman or Mr. Lawson. And again, Ms. Hogan has left the meeting. So the county's revised number of 68,201,200 has been confirmed.
Thank you, board members. Thank you, Mr. Warren. Thank you, Mr. Chitlick.
Thank you all.
Okay, is there any other business either from board members or the county? No. Okay, then we stand adjourned at 11:10 and we will re-adjourn tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.